A 25% tariff on auto parts imported into the United States is about to kick in. Many Americans are asking, will the tariffs lead to higher prices for consumers and a loss of jobs for the country's 1 million auto workers? Well, here to share his thoughts is Spencer Morrison, author of Reshore, How Tariffs Will Bring Our Jobs Home and Revive the American Dream. Okay, Spencer, many consumers are feeling a bit anxious about the tariffs on automobiles and now auto parts, so Trump's rolling back tariffs on steel and aluminum to help lessen the pain. Are higher prices still coming? What do you see happening?
It's a very good question, and I think people are right to be a little worried. I think people need to remember that what President Trump is doing is he's reversing 50 years of trade policy. For the last 50 years, America has had an economic globalist policy with very few barriers to imports. And what President Trump is doing is he's turning that entirely on its head. So I think, the proof needs to be in the pudding. People are worried about prices going up, as they should be. But there's actually very good news coming down the line. And that is that tariffs are not likely to increase prices.
Well, if we do end up with higher prices, let's say they do go up a bit and a decline in car and truck sales, that may lead to layoffs in the auto industry, wouldn't it, or would it?
Well, I think it really depends. I think it's important to remember that the point of these tariffs, there's two purposes to them. One is to get other countries to lower their barriers to entry, to open up new markets for American exports. And if that happens, there's going to be an increased demand for American labor. For example, if the tariff rates in foreign countries were lowered to match the American rates, this is these so-called reciprocal tariffs, American exports would actually increase by $1.5 trillion. And that would support a tremendous amount of jobs. In fact, it would support probably about 4 million new jobs. A large chunk of those are going to be in industries that America has, lucrative employment in. For example, automaking.
We were talking before this interview about used car and truck prices. Might higher prices on parts cause those prices to go up? Maybe even less demand for new cars then lead to higher used car prices?
Well, I think, like I said, there's going to be two effects from these tariffs. One, it's going to be increasing exports, which is going to also increase the exports of American-made vehicles, which should actually increase demand for American labor. And then number two, there's going to be the reshoring of factories from foreign countries back to America, and that's going to actually increase demand for American labor. So we can actually have a paradox here where there can be decreased overall demand for American automobiles, but increased demand for American-made automobiles. And that's where the jobs are. It's in American-made automobiles and parts, not in these foreign-made products.
Donald Trump says, be patient, and Americans are listening. He says tariffs will bring back manufacturing to the U.S. Americans will be better off in the long term. So when would we expect the long term to kick in? Because right now it looks like we may be heading to higher prices and more inflation.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it really does depend on whether or not President Trump sticks to a stable and a high tariff regime. If the tariffs are stable and if they're sufficiently high, that's going to support the reshoring and reindustrialization of American industry, and that can happen pretty quick. For example, America was able to ramp up its economic production by over double in the space of 2 years in the lead up to World War II. And that was done through a cohesive industrial policy, which is what we'd like to see. So it's entirely possible that this reshoring could happen, before the end of President Trump's term. And that's what we'd like to see. But he's got to be consistent on tariffs, and he's got to have them sufficiently high so they're not just a revenue generation scheme.
Well, about $16 billion was raised from tariffs in the month of April. That isn't nearly enough to replace the income taxes the president would like to do, or is it? I mean, how could that ever happen to replace the revenue loss of the income tax?
Well, I think it depends who you're replacing it for. I mean, you have to remember that income tax is actually very, very skewed in the sense that the top 10% pay almost all of the income tax and the bottom 90% pay relatively little. So there has been some calculations done that show that if this tariff revenue keeps up the way it's going, President Trump could literally eliminate income tax for about 75 to 80% of American people and replace it with the tariff revenue.
And what about tariffs on China? Who do you think will blink first? Trump's already pulling back a bit on some of those tariffs.
Yeah, it's a little worrying. The reality is, though, is that America has all the leverage in the trade war with China. And the reason for that is because we actually purchase from China 3 times more products than we sell to them. So every, if the tariffs are even remotely reciprocal, we're doing 3 times the economic damage that they're doing to us. So we have all the leverage in the trade war with China. It's just a question as to whether or not President Trump is going to stay the course and have stable, consistent, and high tariffs against China. And if he does, America will win, no doubt about it.
Okay, Spencer Morrison, author of Reshore, How Tariffs Will Bring Our Jobs Home and Revive the American Dream. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks a lot. God bless.